Tonight's story is about a group of women who didn't follow the rules. These were female pirates, bold, dangerous, and completely unlike what society expected women to be. They dressed like men, led crews, fought battles, and scared even the toughest Navy officers. But what happened when they were finally caught? That's where things got even more interesting. In the 1600s and 1700 seconds, if a man became a pirate and was caught, his fate was simple. He went to trial, got sentenced quickly, and was hanged. It was brutal, but expected. The system was prepared for male criminals. But when a pirate turned out to be a woman, the entire process got confusing. There were no laws written for this. Courts had rules about stealing sheep, marrying your cousin by mistake, or even accusing someone of witchcraft, but nothing about women who led pirate ships. When a female pirate was discovered, it caused a major disruption. Judges didn't know what to do. They'd flip through their dusty law books, hoping to find some guidance, but there was nothing. The first question was always the same: where is her husband? Because people couldn't believe a woman would choose crime on her own. They assumed she was influenced by a man or by the devil. Judges panicked. Was she insane, possessed, or playing a trick? The pirate, on the other hand, would often sit calmly in court, maybe even smiling, fully aware she'd killed armed officers. Just days ago, some judges pushed forward and gave the usual sentence: death by hanging. Others hesitated. Maybe it was the shock, maybe it was fear, or maybe they just didn't want to explain to the church why they hanged a woman in trousers. This confusion led to strange results. Some women were hanged, some were locked away, others got completely unexpected fates. But the one thing they all had in common: the justice system wasn't ready for women with swords and strong opinions. One of the most famous female pirates was Bonnie. She was Irish, had red hair, and didn't fear much. When she was caught in 1720, people thought she would cry, beg for mercy, or talk about knitting and God. Instead, she stood strong and sarcastic. She was sentenced to die alongside her friend and fellow pirate, Mary Red. But Anne had one more move to make. She told the court she was pregnant. In British law at the time, they couldn't execute a pregnant woman. So Anne didn't plead for innocence, she pleaded her belly. It worked. Her hanging was delayed. No one ever proved if she was truly pregnant. Some think she was, others believe she faked it to save her life. Either way, it worked. While the rest of her crew was hanged, Anne was sent to prison and disappeared from records. Some say her wealthy father paid for her release. Some say she lived a quiet life in the end. What's clear is that she didn't hang. In pirate terms, that's a win. Anne's bold move changed everything. Suddenly, pleading the belly became a strategy. Pregnant pirates, that became a courtroom trend. Female pirates started saying they were with child to delay their executions. It was smart. Courts had to take time to find out if they were telling the truth. That delay sometimes turned into freedom. Mary Reed, Anne's partner, also used the same strategy. She told the court she was pregnant, but her story didn't end as well. She got sick in prison, likely due to poor conditions and lack of care. She died before giving birth. No escape, no dramatic ending, just a quiet death in a dirty cell. Some say it was fever or a disease like typhus. Others blame childbirth complications. No one knows for sure. What's certain is that Mary didn't get a second chance like Anne. While Anne and Mary were fighting battles in the Caribbean, on the other side of the world, a Chinese woman was rewriting the rules of piracy altogether. Her name was Qing Shi. Unlike the others, Qing Shi didn't lead a small crew on one ship. She led an entire fleet, over 300 ships, and tens of thousands of pirates. That's not just a pirate crew, that's a floating nation. She wasn't caught because she was too smart for that. While the Chinese Navy and foreign powers tried to stop her, she took a different route. She negotiated. Qing Shi walked into the governor's office and made a deal. She convinced the Chinese government to let her go free, pardon her pirates, and even let her keep her money. She didn't end in prison or at the gallows. She retired. She even opened a gambling house afterward, because running a pirate empire apparently wasn't enough excitement. Her story showed that a woman pirate didn't have to die or be forgotten. She could win. She didn't just break the rules, she changed them. While others were swinging swords in battle or pleading for mercy, Qingxi was organizing supply routes, making alliances, and outsmarting governments. Back in the West, the idea of pleading the belly became common. It came from a very old English law. Don't kill a pregnant woman. She's carrying an innocent life. So when female pirates stood in court, they used this to delay their punishment. They didn't even need proof at first, just confidence. The court would then call a group of women, called a jury of matrons, to check if the prisoner was really pregnant. These matrons weren't trained doctors. They just made a judgment based on what they saw or felt. If you looked a little too skinny, they might say you're lying. If you looked bloated, you might get a delay. Some pirates were truly pregnant. Others faked it. They stuffed their clothes, acted like they were sick, and hoped the matrons were kind or blind. But if the court believed them, the execution was put off. Sometimes for months, sometimes years. That gave these women time to escape, wait for a pardon, or bribe someone. It wasn't perfect, but it gave them a fighting chance. Judges hated this. They didn't like being tricked by pirates, especially not pregnant ones. But the law was the law. If a woman said she had a baby inside her, the court had to pause. And so, many women lived longer not because they were innocent, but because they knew how to play the system. She pleads the belly became a familiar, frustrating phrase in courtrooms across the land. After a female pirate avoided the noose by pleading pregnancy, the next question became a serious problem for the court. Now what? They couldn't hang her, not yet, but they couldn't just let her go either. She was still a pirate. After all, a dangerous one. She had attacked ships, stolen treasure, and maybe killed officers. Letting her walk free would be a huge embarrassment. So the courts had to figure out where to keep her. And let's just say, they weren't exactly prepared. Most prisons were built for men. Men who stole chickens or got into bar fights. Not women, who led pirate raids and carried knives in their boots. So female pirates were often locked up in strange places, empty rooms in forts, abandoned buildings, or even dark, wet basements under government offices. These spots weren't glamorous. Think moldy walls, rats, and almost no light. But they worked sort of. Sometimes these pirates were kept alone, because people were afraid they might spread rebellion to other women. What if the other prisoners got inspired by them? What if they caught the pirate spirit like it was some kind of disease? Other times, they were kept under heavy guard. Guards didn't know how to deal with these women. Should they treat them like ladies? Like criminals? Or like something entirely new, a force of nature in corsets and boots? There were no training guides for this. And if the woman pirate was already famous, things got even messier. Crowds would gather outside the prison just to catch a glimpse of her. Newspapers printed stories. Guards were sometimes bribed to let people come in and stare. It was like an early version of true crime tourism. People didn't just want justice, they wanted drama. Still, prison was dangerous. Not just because of guards or enemies, but because of disease. Many pirates died from fever, infections, or just poor treatment. One by one, their names faded from memory. But even in these terrible places, some women held on. They survived. Not always to be free, but long enough to leave behind a story. And if prison didn't work out, the courts had another idea. Marriage. Yes, you read that right. In some cases, instead of hanging or jailing a female pirate forever, the authorities tried to fix her with a husband. They figured that if she got married, settled down, and had babies, she'd stop pirating. Domestic life would tame her. Maybe laundry and boring dinners would make her forget the sea. Sometimes, the women had no say. They were handed off to random men. Other times, they agreed to the marriage deal to avoid a worse fate. For some, it was survival. For others, it was a secret mission act like a housewife. But keep your pirate heart hidden. Some even married fellow pirates, because who else could understand their past? Of course, this plan didn't always work. Some women used marriage as cover. They hid weapons in the kitchen. They gave their kids sea-themed names. And even though they now wore aprons instead of sashes, they still had the same rebellious spirit. A few even went back to sea under new names, their past buried deep. In other cases, women pirates were offered a deal: give up information in exchange for freedom. This was called turning informant or snitching. The government wanted to know everything: names of other pirates, secret hideouts, routes, and hidden treasure. And these women knew things. They had sailed with the worst of them. They had listened during drunken confessions. They knew who had gold, who had guns, and who had enemies. So they talked. Sometimes the information was real. Other times, they made it up, naming pirates who were already dead, or inventing fake smuggling rings. The courts didn't always check. They just wanted leads. And for some women, talking bought them time. It got them lighter sentences or even complete freedom. Some women became full-time informants, helping the Navy track down their old crewmates. That's how desperate governments were to break pirate networks. And even if they lied, it didn't matter. What mattered was survival. For many, this was their best shot. But not every woman got lucky. Some were executed. And when that happened, the public showed up in huge numbers. Executions were the ultimate show. They weren't private. They were public events, like a grim version of Netflix. Everyone came: farmers, nobles, kids, and merchants. People brought food, drinks, and gossip. They wanted to see the pirate who'd made headlines. But when the condemned pirate was a woman, it was different. It was a scandal. It was shocking. And for some, it was exciting. A woman who had broken every rule was now about to face the final punishment. But not all of them went quietly. Some walked to the gallows proudly. They gave speeches, insulted the judges, and even joked with the executioner. One supposedly told the priest to hurry up because he was boring. These moments became legends. Newspapers printed every word. The authorities hoped these deaths would scare people, but often, the opposite happened. The pirates became heroes. People admired their bravery. Their final words were printed and remembered. Instead of being erased, they became larger than life. Some wept, some sang hymns, and others said nothing at all. But each one became a symbol of resistance, defiance, and power. And when the pirates weren't killed, the system still tried to erase them in another way, by rewriting their stories. Historians, mostly men, turned these women into characters. If she died young, they called her a sad, lost soul. If she outsmarted the law, they called her a trickster. If she dressed like a man, that became the focus, not her courage, not her leadership. Over time, facts got buried under myths. Anne Bonny became a wild redhead with a sword in one hand and rum in the other. Mary Read became her sidekick. Ching Shi was painted as an exotic mystery, and hundreds of other women, they disappeared completely. No names, no records, no songs. History forgot them, or chose to. You see, most female pirates weren't famous. They were regular women: tavern girls, sailors' wives, farmers who joined pirate crews for survival, revenge, or adventure. Some were brilliant fighters, others just worked hard and followed orders. But once they were caught, they didn't fit the story people wanted, so they were labeled as pirate wenches and shoved aside. Many were buried in unmarked graves. Some were sold into labor. Others may have escaped and started quiet lives in places where no one asked about their past. But their silence is its own kind of legacy. Even if their names were lost, they were still there. They challenged the rules. They broke barriers. They lived dangerous, daring lives. And they were erased because of it. Yet their stories still matter. They show that women didn't just watch history, they helped shape it. They didn't just follow orders, they gave them. And even when the world tried to bury them, their stories survived in whispers, rumors, and a few bold records. Because the truth is, female pirates weren't rare, they just weren't remembered. Ships were mostly male spaces. Women weren't allowed on board in many navies or private crews. Some captains believed having a woman on board was bad luck. Others thought the men would lose focus. So for a woman to sail, she had to disguise herself, cut her hair, flatten her chest, deepen her voice. If she was discovered, she could be thrown overboard or killed. Even in the world of crime, Sexism was everywhere. Male pirates were celebrated with songs and nicknames. Female pirates were either seen as freaks or not seen at all. Their crimes weren't taken seriously, but their existence made powerful men uncomfortable. So yes, there were probably many more women pirates than we know. They just didn't make it into the official books. They didn't get trials. They didn't get ballads. They got footnotes if they were lucky. Their stories were buried on purpose. Because women with swords, ships, and power don't fit neatly into the history people wanted to tell. But the sea didn't care about gender, and neither did the gunpowder. Only the people writing the history books did. So what happened when a female pirate didn't get hanged, wasn't locked up forever, and didn't end up married off to some unlucky stranger? Simple. The system tried to change her, reform her, turn her into something more acceptable, a proper lady. After all, society couldn't allow a pirate to just walk free. What if she inspired other women to disobey? The plan was basic. Take a violent, fearless woman who used to command men and ships, and teach her how to embroider pillows. No, seriously. Some women were sent to convents. Others were placed in homes for fallen women, which sounds kind, but really just meant government-run places with terrible food, strict rules, and lots of guilt. These homes focused on religion. If a woman memorized prayers and said she was sorry, she was considered fixed. In truth, it wasn't about saving their souls. It was about making them invisible. Governments didn't want these women roaming free, telling stories about how they once captured a Spanish ship using only guts and a dirty joke. They wanted these women quiet, obedient, and out of the way. Some played along. They nodded during sermons, stitched quietly, and pretended to change. Others simply waited then escaped, changed their names, and returned to sea. Some even stayed on land, but ran their homes like ships, organized, loud, and possibly armed. But not every woman needed to marry or fake religion to avoid the rope. Some found a much less honorable, but very effective way out. They snitched. Yes, they talked. They told the authorities everything. They gave up names, secret routes, where loot was hidden, and who was planning the next attack. Governments loved this. They didn't just want pirates, they wanted entire pirate networks. These women had the inside scoop. They'd sailed with the worst of the worst, heard plans whispered over rum, and knew which harbors looked the other way. For some, talking bought them time. For others, it bought their freedom. Some even became regular informants, helping the Navy chase down their former friends. Imagine a woman who once led a pirate mutiny now sitting in a courtroom, pointing at a map and saying, "That's where they keep the gold." Cold. Maybe. Smart. Definitely. Of course, not all the information was true. Some women lied. They made up names, named pirates who were already dead, created fake smuggling stories. The officials didn't always check, they just wanted leads. So while some women still ended up hanged after giving all they knew, others walked away smiling. It was a total switch from pirate to paper pusher, from sword fights to information deals. Still, many didn't make it out at all. Plenty of female pirates were executed, and when that happened, it was a show. Public executions were like entertainment back then. Crowds gathered. Kids, nobles, poor workers, everyone came to watch. They brought snacks. They cheered. It was gruesome and popular, but if the person about to be hanged was a woman, especially a pirate, the excitement doubled. It was shocking, a scandal, something they hadn't seen before. A woman who had dressed like a man, fought like a man, and defied everything women were supposed to be, was now about to die for it. People couldn't look away. Authorities loved using these executions as moral lessons. They wanted the public to think, see what happens when a woman steps out of line. The message was clear: be quiet, be obedient, don't be like her. But the crowd didn't always agree. Some female pirates won the public over. They walked to the scaffold without fear. They gave fiery speeches. They insulted the people who sentenced them. One even scolded the priest for being too boring during her last prayer. Others sang, cried, or said nothing at all. But whatever they did, it became part of the story. Newspapers wrote down every detail. The woman's last words, Her clothing. Whether she smiled before the drop, the government hoped to erase her, but sometimes, her final moments made her unforgettable. Instead of being a warning, she became a legend. That's the strange thing about female pirates. The state tried to destroy them, but often, their deaths made them more powerful. It wasn't just that they died, it was how they died. With bravery, sarcasm, or silence. With pride, with defiance. It made them unforgettable. And once they were dead, or disappeared into prison, or fake marriages, their stories didn't stop. They got rewritten, but not by them, usually by men. Male writers took these women and twisted their stories into whatever they wanted. If a woman died young, they turned her into a tragic victim. If she lived, they called her a freak, or claimed she didn't really exist. If she dressed like a man, that became the main story, never mind that she commanded ships and fought battles. All people could talk about was the trousers. And Bonnie became a rum-drinking, sword-swinging redhead in popular books. Mary Read turned into a quiet sidekick. Ching Shi became an exotic mystery, dangerous but unreal. Countless other female pirates were erased completely. They didn't even get names, just descriptions like pirate wench or female accomplice. Why? Because they didn't fit the story history wanted to tell. Most of them were ordinary women, poor women, women who joined pirate crews for money, survival, or freedom. They weren't famous. They didn't wear fancy clothes or lead big battles. But they were there, and when they were caught, they vanished from record because they weren't loud enough? Maybe. Because they didn't make the newspapers? Sure, but mainly because their existence made men uncomfortable. Some were buried in mass graves. Some were killed quietly, others escaped and lived quiet lives far away from the sea. But we know they existed, even if we don't know their names. Their stories were erased on purpose, but that's what makes them true pirates. They broke the rules. They fought the system. They got cut from the script not because they failed, but because they were too difficult to explain, too powerful, too real. Now, let's talk about the pirates who weren't forgotten. The lucky ones, in a way. The famous names like Bonnie and Ching Shi. Even though they faced trials, jail, or death, they still made it into the history books. They became stories, symbols, even Halloween costumes. But what made them stand out? Partly, they were just louder, bolder. Their trials were dramatic. Their quotes were unforgettable. They refused to go quietly. The courts tried to break them. Instead, they embarrassed the courts. And Bonnie mocked her judge. Mary Read stood tall at her trial. Ching Shi retired rich after cutting a deal with an empire. They were legends because they refused to be anything else. Yet, for every famous name, there were many more who didn't get remembered. Not because they didn't matter, but because they didn't make the newspapers. They didn't get a trial with spectators. They didn't plead the belly, or marry a man, or cut a deal. They just vanished. Still, whether they died in jail or escaped in disguise, they left a mark. They cracked open the idea that women had to be quiet, gentle, or obedient. They proved that women could fight, lead, steal, and survive. They didn't just live in history, they changed it. That's why these stories matter, not just because they're exciting, but because they show how powerful, smart, and complicated these women really were. They weren't perfect, they weren't saints, but they were brave, and dangerous, and real. And even if the world tried to erase them, they left behind enough truth to prove they were there. So, what if the court didn't hang her, didn't imprison her for life, and didn't marry her off to some poor man? What then? The answer: reform her. Teach her how to behave like a real woman. That was the plan. In the 18th century, reform didn't mean therapy or support. It meant forcing women to forget their past and fit into society's idea of proper womanhood. A former pirate wasn't given a chance to tell her story or rebuild her life in a way that honored who she was. She was told to sit still, sew, pray, and be quiet. Some were sent to convents. Others went to homes for fallen women, places where women were made to feel ashamed of everything they'd done. There, they were taught skills like sewing, cooking, and cleaning. They had to attend religious classes and reflect on their sins. The goal was not to heal them, it was to hide them. Authorities didn't want a woman who once led a ship telling others about her adventures. That would be dangerous. The government hoped these women would quietly disappear into new lives, blending in like they had never been pirates at all. But it didn't always work. Some women played along long enough to escape. Others returned to sea under new names. A few stayed home, but ran their households with the same order and toughness they used on deck. You can take a woman off a pirate ship, but you can't always take the pirate out of the woman. And then there was another path, less noble maybe, but effective. Talking. If you were a captured pirate, giving information to the authorities could be your way out. It wasn't about bravery, it was about survival. Authorities didn't just want to catch pirates, they wanted to destroy entire pirate networks. They needed names, ship locations, hidden treasure, and secret routes. And who had that knowledge? Captured pirates, especially. Women who had been right there in the thick of things. So some of these women made deals. They became informants. In return, they got lighter sentences, or sometimes full pardons. Some even got paid or moved to better conditions. A few made careers out of it, helping navies catch their former crewmates. Was it betrayal? Maybe, but when you're staring at the news, survival can look more important than loyalty. And these women were clever. Some gave real names and facts. Others made stuff up, claiming they knew pirates who were already dead or had sailed with famous captains they never actually met. They told the authorities what they wanted to hear, and it often worked. The courts were overwhelmed and eager for anything that sounded like useful intel. Even if the information was false, the woman sometimes walked free. It's not pretend all pirates escaped. Some were definitely executed, but even then, the way they died said a lot about who they were. Executions in the 18th century were public events. They weren't just punishments, they were performances. And when the person being hanged was a woman pirate, the crowd came in droves. People were fascinated. Here was a woman who had lived like a man, fought like a man, and now she was going to die like one too. Or so the courts hoped. Some women pirates stood tall at the scaffold. They insulted the judges. They made speeches. They smiled at the crowd or stared down the executioner. One even scolded the priest for taking too long with her last rites. She wanted to get it over with already. These women didn't give the system the satisfaction of fear. Others wept. Some sang hymns. Some were silent to the very end. Each execution was different, but every one of them became a story. Newspapers printed the details. People told the tales. And sometimes, the legend grew even larger after death. That's the funny part. The authorities wanted these executions to scare people. Look what happens when women get too wild, they were saying. Obey, or this could be you. But sometimes, the public admired the pirate more than the people who punished her. They saw bravery, defiance, style, and they remembered her. That's why, even in death, some of these women refused to disappear. The court tried to erase them, but they became unforgettable. They turned into myths, and after death, their stories didn't stop. They just changed. Writers, mostly men, took control of the stories. They rewrote these pirates into whatever suited their agenda. If a woman died young, she became a tragic, fallen angel. If she survived, she was painted as a sneaky liar. If she fooled the system, she was called a fake. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was making the story fit a comfortable idea. Real-life actions were replaced with dramatic tales. And Bonnie was turned into a fire-haired wild woman with a bottle of rum in one hand and a sword in the other. Mary Read was reduced to a loyal sidekick. Ching Shi, one of the smartest pirate leaders in history, became an exotic mystery. And all the other women who didn't have famous names, they were erased or turned into nameless characters in ballads, novels, and folklore. A pirate queen who looked familiar. A woman with a blade and no shame. Always dramatic. Always punished. Never fully real. That's how history treated them. It didn't remember the real women. It remembered the stories that made men feel in control. That's why so many female pirates were lost to time, not because they didn't matter, but because they made the world uncomfortable. You might wonder, why weren't there more of them? Why do we only hear about a few names? The answer is simple. There were more, many more, but they weren't allowed to be remembered. Ships were male spaces. Women weren't allowed on board. Some believed a woman would bring bad luck. Others thought the men would be too distracted, so women who wanted to sail had to hide. They cut their hair. They wore loose clothes. They spoke less. If they were discovered, they could be thrown overboard. Or worse, even among criminals, women weren't taken seriously. Male pirates were celebrated. They got songs and cool nicknames. Female pirates were seen as strange or evil. They were either temptresses or freaks. There was no middle ground. So, when women pirates were caught, they weren't given fair trials. They weren't seen as full people. They were labeled as wives, followers, or mistakes. Their crimes weren't seen as choices. They were blamed on men, on madness, or on Satan. That's why so many female pirates never made it into the books. They didn't get stories. They didn't get remembered. They got silence. But here's the truth. They were there. They didn't just exist. They made waves, literally. They defied every expectation. They lived on their own terms. They scared governments more than guns. Why? Because they broke all the rules. And that's what made them dangerous. They weren't supposed to be violent. They weren't supposed to lead. They weren't supposed to survive. But they did. Some got hanged. Some escaped. Some married. Some pleaded pregnancy. A few made deals. One retired richer than anyone who ever tried to catch her. Most were forgotten. But the real story isn't just what happened to them, it's what their stories say about the world around them. A world that didn't know what to do with women who refused to behave. These women didn't just break the law, they shattered society's rules about what women could be. And when that happened, the world responded with fear. Hang her, silence her, rewrite her, erase her. But she was already part of history, and no matter how hard they tried, the story couldn't be fully buried. Most of the world expected pirates to be men. And when women became pirates, they didn't just break laws, they broke expectations. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't care what people thought. They lived wildly, fought hard, and sometimes, when caught, they outsmarted the entire justice system. That's why, centuries later, their stories still echo. Many of these women were seen as criminals. And yes, they were. They stole ships, looted treasure, and sometimes killed. But so did the men they sailed with. The only difference? Men were expected to be violent. Women were not. That's what made female pirates so scary to society, not what they did, but that they did it as women. So what happened to them after capture? Some were executed. Some died in prison. Some pleaded pregnancy and lived. Others got married. A few made deals and escaped punishment. Most were forgotten. But no matter the ending, each pirate woman revealed something important. How deeply uncomfortable society was with women who refused to obey. Think about it. These were women who boarded ships when they were told to stay at home. They led crews when they were expected to follow. They used swords, not sewing needles. When they were finally caught, society didn't just punish them for stealing, it punished them for daring to exist outside the lines. Every type of punishment, hanging, prison, reform, forced marriage, or being erased from history, was a way to make the problem go away. Not just the crime, but the idea that women could be powerful and independent. The message was clear: behave or be erased. But even erased stories can leave a trace. Some pirates were remembered, even if their stories were twisted. Anne Bonny didn't die by hanging. Ching Shi retired rich. Mary Read died in prison, but her legend lived on. They didn't vanish quietly. Still, many others did. Most female pirates didn't get songs or books. They were buried and forgotten, graves, or slipped away into new lives. But their choices, however brief or quiet, still mattered. Each one was a crack in the wall, a signal that women weren't just side characters in history. They were warriors, rebels, survivors. Let's look at a strange but clever legal tactic that helped some of them survive: pleading the belly. It sounds odd, but it was real. In Old English law, a pregnant woman couldn't be executed because it would also kill an innocent unborn child. Courts might be brutal, but even they knew that didn't look good. So, a woman on trial for piracy would say she was pregnant. The court couldn't ignore that. They had to investigate, which meant calling a group of local women called a jury of matrons to examine her. These matrons weren't doctors. They just checked and guessed. Sometimes they were wrong, but if they believed her, the court had to delay the execution. Some pirates were truly pregnant. Others faked it using padding, holding their stomachs, or acting the part. If it worked, they got more time, months, even years. In some cases, they escaped completely. This tactic didn't always guarantee freedom, but it gave hope. And it showed how clever these women were. They didn't rely only on force, they used strategy, law, and timing. They understood how the system worked and played it against itself. Even when they weren't pregnant, some used their words like weapons. In court, they didn't just sit quietly. They spoke up. They made jokes. They insulted the judges. They exposed the ridiculous way the system treated them. Some offered sharp, unforgettable lines that ended up in newspapers. The courtroom became a stage, and they knew how to perform. And if they didn't win the trial, they still might win the public. Sometimes the audience, the crowd, the readers, they liked the pirate. They saw her as brave, smart, funny, and that popularity sometimes helped. Courts didn't want to make a martyr out of someone the public loved. Executing a woman with fans could cause trouble. So some pirates got mercy not because they were innocent, but because they were unforgettable. Others took a more quiet path to survival. They made deals. They turned in crewmates. They offered secret info. Governments were desperate to end piracy. So if a woman pirate said, "I know where the treasure is," officials listened. This was risky. Pirates had strong codes against snitching. Telling on your crew could get you killed. But if the alternative was hanging, some chose to talk. And once they started talking, they often said whatever the authorities wanted to hear. Even if the information wasn't true, they named people who were dead. They made up hideouts. They claimed to have sailed with famous pirates they'd never met. It didn't always work, but sometimes it did. And those who escaped got to start over. New names, new towns, new lives. Some even kept working with the Navy, helping to track other pirates. That's right, former pirates became pirate hunters. Talk about a twist. But what if none of that worked? What if the court said no to pregnancy, no to marriage, no to reform or deals? Then came the gallows, and that too became a spectacle. Hanging a female pirate was a big deal. People traveled to see it. Crowds packed the area. It wasn't just justice, it was entertainment. And for some people, it was a message. Don't mess with the rules. The woman on the scaffold wasn't just dying, she was being made into a warning. Authorities hoped people would say, "Wow, I'd better behave." But that's not always what happened. Some women gave powerful speeches. Some stood proud. Some showed no fear. Some even cursed. The people watching, and their strength made a big impression. Newspapers printed every word. Artists made drawings. Gossip spread. These executions were supposed to silence these women, but they often made them legends instead. That's the strange part. The system tried to erase female pirates, but sometimes it made them famous. After death, their stories were retold, not always accurately, often rewritten by men who wanted to turn them into tragic women, evil monsters, or misunderstood victims. The real people were replaced by characters, but those characters stuck, and slowly, people began to look deeper. They started asking questions. Who were these women, really? What drove them? Why weren't there more of them? The answers pointed to the truth. There were more, many more. They just didn't get remembered. History is full of women who didn't fit the mold and were pushed aside. But they were there on ships, in battles, in courtrooms, in cells. They were fighting, surviving, and refusing to give up. That's what female pirates show us. Not just that women can be rebels, but that they always have been, even when history tried to forget. So much of what we know about female pirates comes from stories told long after they were gone, often by people who didn't know them, or didn't want to tell the full truth. These stories were changed, reshaped, and sometimes completely made up. And yet, They were all we had for a long time. Writers and historians, most of them men, often didn't know what to make of women who led pirate crews. They turned them into dramatic characters. If a pirate woman died young, she became a tragic figure. If she escaped punishment, she was called a liar. If she fought back and made people nervous, she was called evil or unnatural. The problem wasn't that these women were forgotten, it's that they were turned into simple stories. And Bonnie was turned into a wild, red-haired rebel. Mary Read became her sidekick. Qing Shi was portrayed as a mysterious dragon lady of the sea. None of these versions were fully real. They were just easier for people to accept, and the ones who didn't get turned into legends. They got left out completely. There were many female pirates whose names we'll never know. Why? Because they didn't give speeches in court. They didn't get newspaper coverage. They were locked up, executed quietly, or forced to vanish into regular life. History ignored them on purpose. Not because they weren't brave or smart, but because they didn't fit the story the world wanted to tell. Some were probably sailors' wives who joined the crew after their husbands died. Some were barmaids who followed pirates out of the city, hoping for a better life. Some were just bored and angry and wanted to escape. They fought. They led. They stole, but when caught, they weren't treated like people. They were just called female accomplices or pirate wenches, as if their names didn't matter. Sometimes their bodies were buried without markers. Their trials weren't recorded. Their final words weren't written down. Court records would say, "A woman taken at sea." And that was it. She was erased. The truth is, these women were strong, but they were also tired, beaten down by prisons, disease, and a world that refused to recognize them. They didn't become famous, but that doesn't mean they didn't matter. Every one of them challenged the idea that women were supposed to stay quiet, stay home, and follow orders. They lived fast, fought hard, and were punished for it. But even in silence, they made a mark. That's the most pirate-like thing of all, causing trouble, even when no one wants to admit you existed. Now imagine this. The court doesn't hang her, doesn't imprison her forever, doesn't marry her off, doesn't even bother reforming her. What next? They try to turn her into a proper lady. This was the final, desperate attempt to erase a pirate woman's past. Teach her to act right. Teach her to sew and bake. Teach her to be quiet. Maybe, just maybe, she'll forget that she once led a crew, battled warships, and stole Spanish gold. They sent women like this to places like convents or homes for fallen women. The goal was to break them down, make them feel guilty, replace their memories with religion and chores. Sure, the logic went, she once burned down a ship, but if she prays hard enough, she'll be normal again. Did it work? Sometimes, maybe. Some women stayed. Others smiled politely, pretended to change, and waited for the right moment to leave. But let's be honest, this wasn't really about saving souls. It was about control. The government didn't want these women giving speeches in taverns or telling their stories to other girls. They wanted them hidden, quiet, forgotten. Some went along, some didn't. Some returned to piracy. Others ran homes that felt more like pirate ships, strict, loud, and probably armed. And then there was one last way a female pirate might survive. By talking loudly about everything and everyone. This was called snitching, informing, giving up your crew, your secrets, and your alliances. Authorities loved this. They wanted to know everything. Who was smuggling what? Which ships were vulnerable? Where to find buried treasure? And pirates, especially ones who had been around, knew it all. Some women used this as their escape. They named names, gave details, drew maps. Sometimes it was real, sometimes it was made up, but it didn't matter. The court wanted to believe, and for the pirate, it was a trade. Information for survival. Was it cowardly? Some would say yes, others would say it was clever. When your life is on the line, loyalty starts to look a little overrated. Some pirates became full-time informants. They helped the Navy track down their old friends. They stood in courtrooms, pointing at charts and saying, "Here's where you'll find them." Cold? Maybe. Smart? Absolutely. And some of them lied. They gave names that didn't matter, said things that weren't true. The authorities were too busy, too stressed, and too eager to catch anyone. Did it always work? No, some women still ended up dead, but others walked away completely free. They disappeared into quiet coastal towns, never to be heard from again. Some probably raised kids who had no idea their mother once threatened a captain with a sword. Snitching may not have been romantic, but it was real, and it worked more often than you'd think, because that's the heart of all these stories. Survival. These women didn't follow one path. Some fought, some begged, some played the system, some vanished, some died, but all of them did what they had to do to survive, and in a world that was built to crush them, that alone was an act of rebellion. In the end, female pirates remind us of something important. History often only tells half the story. It remembers the big names, the loud events, and the people in power, but it forgets the rebels, the misfits, the women who refused to sit quietly, while men made all the rules. These pirate women weren't just side characters in a bigger story. They were the story. They made choices most people never dared to consider. They rejected the lives they were told to live, and sailed straight into danger instead. They chose freedom, even if it meant breaking the law, even if it meant death. And they did it in a time when women were barely allowed to speak in court. A time when they couldn't vote, own land in many places, or make decisions without a man's approval. So when a woman took over a ship, or led a mutiny, or shot at a naval officer, she wasn't just committing a crime, she was making a statement. She was saying, "I won't follow your rules." That's why the world didn't know what to do with her. The courtrooms were confused. The judges were angry. The newspapers were fascinated. And the people, they couldn't stop talking about her. Some pirate women used swords and pistols. Others used words and tricks. Some played the role of a lady until it was time to strike. Others dressed like men and never looked back. There wasn't just one way to be a pirate, and there wasn't just one way to be a woman. That was the real threat. That's what society couldn't handle. Even the ones who didn't get remembered changed things. Even the ones whose names we'll never know made cracks in the walls built around them. With every escape, every trick, every plea, they forced the world to pause and ask, what if women don't follow the script? And that's why their stories matter, not just because they're exciting or rebellious, but because they reveal the truth. Power doesn't always come with a title. Sometimes it comes with a risk, with a choice, with a woman standing on a deck, looking at the open sea, and deciding she's had enough of being told who to be. That woman might die young. She might disappear. She might get rewritten. But she was there, and that matters. Even today, the way we talk about female pirates reflects how we treat bold women. We often call them crazy, wild, or dangerous. We focus on how they looked or who they dated, instead of what they did. We turn them into characters fun, strange, dramatic, but not serious. But they were serious. They knew how to command a ship, how to fight, how to plan raids and make deals. They weren't accidents. They were leaders, and many of them got away with it. That's the part we often forget. Not every story ends in chains or a noose. Some women won. Take Qing Shi, for example. She didn't die in a battle or in a jail. She negotiated with the Chinese government. She walked away free with her money, her ships, and her power intact. She even opened a business and lived to old age. That's not just survival, that's victory. Her story proves that a pirate woman could outsmart the system completely. She didn't just break the rules, she rewrote them. Other women followed different paths. Some left the sea and raised families. Some lived in disguise. Some never got caught. We'll never know all their stories, but we can guess at parts of them. A scar here, a tattoo there, a strange sea tale passed down in a village. Little signs that someone lived a life bigger than the one the world allowed. And maybe that's enough. Because stories don't always need full names and dates to matter. Sometimes, it's the feeling they leave behind, the sense that somewhere, someone stood up and said no. No to being quiet. No to being small. No to being forgotten. And that's why we're still talking about them. And Bonnie, Mary Red, Qing Shi, and all the others who sailed without names, without permission, and without fear. They were pirates, yes, but they were also pioneers, fighters, survivors, leaders, and even though the world tried to erase them, their stories are still here rising like waves that refuse to go silent, because in the end, the sea doesn't care who you are, it only cares if you're brave enough to sail it, and they were.